Welcome to our discussion on steep turns. Here's the objective for the lesson. You should develop a knowledge of the elements related to steep turns, including load factor, adverse yaw, overbanking tendency, and this is all in accordance with the ACS or the PTS. Here are the key elements. This is what I want you to take away from this, if nothing else. First of all, overbanking tendencies. Coordination. Recognize that we're going to need more back pressure and thrust, and maintaining altitude with elevators and or bank. The elements of this lesson will include maximum performance turn, the science behind turns, and how to perform a steep turn. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments. So what is it? A steep turn is a maximum performance turn in which we maintain altitude and airspeed, and we perform it at a steep angle of bank. Why do we care? Why do we practice this? Well, mostly because we want to perfect our technique, but it also helps us practice dividing our attention between the inside and the outside of the aircraft. Remember, 90% of our time in VFR world should be spent outside of the aircraft looking for traffic, and then 10% should be spent inside looking at the instruments and verifying everything is correct. So we want to be practicing our coordination, executing good turns using rudder pedals, and basically just becoming better stick and rudder pilots. Now, let's talk about how to perform a steep turn. First of all, it is a maximum performance turn. So you will be at VA, and your angle of bank is going to be 45 to 50 degrees, depending on private pilot or commercial. Recognize that most aircraft are going to have a max angle of bank they recommend at 50 or 60 degrees. So this will be right at the maximum performance of your aircraft. So let's talk about what makes a plane turn. A lot of people think that it's the rudder, like a boat. But we know different. What is it? It's the horizontal component of lift. As we roll an aircraft, our lift vector from our wings rolls from being vertical to having a vertical and horizontal component. And it's that horizontal component of lift that pulls the aircraft through the turn. Right? Now, as we roll into this turn, our vertical lift we convert some of our vertical lift to horizontal lift, and so we're going to lose a component that we need to stay at altitude. So this extra lift here, we're going to need to account for it using trim or back elevator pressure or power or something to get us to stay at our altitude. Now let's talk about bank angle and load factor. First of all, what is load factor? Load factor, or G loading, is the additional weight the aircraft experiences as a result of a bank. And it's going to be that, the aircraft's weight plus its centrifugal force. And so we refer to it as G's. So as you roll into a 60-degree angle of bank, you're going to be pulling about 2 G's. If you roll into an 80-degree angle of bank, it's going to be about 6 G's. And you're going to feel that. You're going to feel yourself getting pulled down into your seat. You're going to feel twice your own weight at 60 degrees angle of bank. Recognize that as you increase the bank angle, you increase the load factor exponentially, by the way, it's not linear, and you also increase your stall speed. So at straight and level flight, you'll stall at a certain speed, but if you are in an aggressive bank, your stall speed will increase, in this case, by more than 40%. So you will stall sooner. You're going to stall faster if you are in a steep bank. So keep that in mind. Now let's talk about adverse yaw. Now you and I both know that drag is a product of lift. It is a byproduct of lift. And so if we have an aircraft that we are flying around and we put in a left bank, our right aileron is going to drop, our left aileron is going to rise, and our right wing will generate more lift than our left wing. That's great. The aircraft's going to roll to the left. However, because this wing is generating more lift, it's also going to be generating more drag, right? And so as we roll, our nose is going to get dragged in the opposite direction of our turn. Boy, that's annoying, right? So our aircraft's going to roll to the left, and our nose is going to yaw to the right. And so what are we going to do? We're going to put in some rudder inputs to adjust for that adverse yaw. And that is what the rudder is for. Not for making the turn, but for correcting for adverse yaw and just controlling yaw in general. Now let's talk about Sir Isaac Newton. One of Newton's laws says that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So let's talk about choppercopters, helicopters. Look at my beautiful helicopter here. So as a helicopter flies, the engine rotates the main rotor one direction. And because of Newton's law, one of Newton's laws of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The helicopter wants to rotate in the opposite direction. It wants to spin in the opposite direction that the rotors are spinning. And so we have tail rotor to account for that unwanted torque effect. Now, in our Cessna 172 or in our general aviation aircraft, as the propeller spins, that's our propeller. As our propeller spins in one direction, our aircraft wants to roll in the opposite direction, and that's called torque effect. And so we have to be aware of the fact that our aircraft wants to roll to the left for the most part. And so how do we use this to our advantage in a steep turn? In a steep turn, if we were rolling to the left, the aircraft wants to roll to the left, so it's going to help that roll. If we're rolling to the right, then the aircraft wants to roll in the opposite direction, and so it's actually going to fight us a little bit. So just be aware of that. Now, you just have to recognize that you're going to need to put in appropriate inputs to account for that. Now, let's talk about the overbanking tendency. Because you are in a steep bank, one wing is actually going to be traveling through the air faster. It has a longer path to travel, so it actually has to move faster through the air than the inner wing. Because lift is a product of velocity, this wing is going to generate more lift, and it's going to want to continue banking or rolling even though you don't want it to. So you're going to have to be ready for that by putting in opposite aileron pressure, just a little bit, just enough to prevent it from overbanking. So be aware of that. Now let's talk about performing the steep turn. Before any maneuver, what do? Clearing turns. That's right. We want to do our clearing turns. So if we're flying through here, we're going to turn to the right, turn to the left, clear the airspace, and then use our checklist to make sure that everything's straight. And then we're going to note an outside reference. We're going to bug our heading. If this is our aircraft here, we're going to note our outside reference, bug our heading. We're going to select an altitude no lower than 1,500 feet. That is our hard deck, because we want to have enough altitude to glide down to a safe area. As always, you want to select an area that has a suitable landing area nearby. And then when you're ready, you've done your clearing turns, you've done your checklist, you're at maneuver speed, pitch, power, and trim, hands-off flight, right? At 1,500 above ground level or more, altitude is your friend. You're going to roll into a 45 or 50-degree bank, a 50-degree angle of bank. If you are a private, that's 45, commercial is 50. You're going to roll into your bank and then use your trim tab. You're going to roll your trim wheel back 1, 2, 3 to account for that loss of vertical lift. And then keep your nose on the horizon and go through the turn. Some common errors before you or as you're getting into the turn are improper pitch, bank, and power settings. Remember, you want to be trimmed for hands-off flight before you even start the maneuver. I'm telling you, trimming your aircraft is one of the best ways to make flying simple. Make it a lot easier. Now, during the turn, I'm going to draw my airplane here. 5, 6. You want to spend most of your time looking outside of the aircraft. Like we said before, 90% of your time should be spent up and out looking for other traffic. We don't want to be focusing or fixating on the instruments. And then 10% of your time should be spent inside, double checking, verifying what you expect to see on your instruments. Now, as you are performing the maneuver, you might see that you're losing some altitude. And the initial gut reaction is to just yank back on the yoke. The problem with that is because you are in such a steep angle of bank, there's a good chance you're just going to spiral in. You won't be able to adjust correctly. So what you should do is roll out of the bank a little bit. You have some margin for error. Roll out of the bank a little bit. Adjust your pitch, power, trim setting. Pull back on the yoke, add a little bit of power, maybe add a little nose up trim, and then get back to that angle of bank that you need. And that should get you, right where you need to be. Some common errors during the turn include loss of orientation, getting lost in the sauce. Never a good thing. Always be, ahead of the aircraft. Improper corrections, yanking hard on the yoke, trying to regain your altitude and then spiraling in. Or uncoordinated turns. Oh man, that's a big one. You want to be coordinated at all times. So those are your common errors. Make sure to cover for them. Now let's talk about rolling out. So we've got our reference point and we're coming around. Right, here's our airplane. A general rule of thumb is you should always roll out of a bank at half the bank angle. So lead your roll out by half the bank angle. So if you are at a 50-degree angle of bank, divide that by 2, you get 25 degrees. So 25 degrees before you get to your heading, your initial heading, you can start putting in your inputs to roll back to level flight. If you're a private pilot level, you're going to roll to level flight first and then reconfigure. Or if you're in a commercial level, you'll be rolling from the left bank straight into a right bank, right? And then once you are back in that turn, you're going to do everything all over again. Now, once you are returning to straight and level, you're leading off your rollout by half the bank angle. You're going to anticipate the fact that you're going to be dumping all of your horizontal lift back into vertical lift again. So be prepared with that trim wheel to roll it forward again 3 times or so, give or take. And then pitch power trim, as always, trim for hands off flight, and you should be good to go. Now, some common errors when rolling out of the turn are improper pitch, bank, and power settings, like we said, uncoordinated use of controls, so always use your rudder pedals correctly, improper corrections, don't be yanking on the controls, trying to regain altitude, and then loss of orientation, getting lost in the sauce again. Keep your head on a swivel, know where you are at all times. In conclusion, what did we talk about? We talked about steep turns. They are a performance maneuver. Why do we care? Because it helps us practice our division of attentions. It helps us practice our division of attention. It helps us practice our coordination. It helps us perfect our turning technique. Where do we practice it? Within gliding distance of a safe area to land and 1,500 feet above ground level at least. Remember, the most useless thing to a pilot is runway behind you and altitude above you. So, practice this up at altitude. And how do we do it? Remember, clearing turns first, checklist, maneuver speed, pitch power, trim for hands off flight, and then select your reference point, bug your heading, roll into the bank, 45 degrees, pull the trim tab 1, 2, 3, and then keep your nose on the horizon while you do it. Spend most of your time outside of the aircraft, and then lead off your turn by how much? Half the bank angle. And then be prepared to adjust for that increase of vertical lift when you go back to straight and level and readjust your trim. And then pitch power trim, like always. Bam. All right, that about covers it. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear down in the comments. And thanks for watching. See ya.